As a parent advocate, I know that families need a lot of information in order to navigate the special education system. This series of advocacy shorts is a collaborative project between ASSA, the State Association of Private Special Ed Schools in New Jersey, and the attorneys at Hinkle, Finkles, and Pryor, who generously donated their time and expertise to help answer some of the more common questions that families have as they try to advocate for their sons or daughters in the special education system. I hope you find them helpful. Ira, once the IEP has been developed for a child with a disability, who decides where that child goes to school? How do they determine a child's placement?
Brenda, I'm glad you asked the question that way because you're drawing a distinction between the IEP, which is the Student's Educational Program, and placement. The answer to the question of who decides is, as with everything else, it's the IEP team, which includes the student's parents and the student where appropriate. The distinction between program and placement is very important for parents and school districts to understand. The special education laws require that we make decisions about students' programs before we decide upon a student's placement, and there's an important reason for that. If we do it the other way around, we're going to find ourselves fitting the student's program to the placement. So if we have a placement in school X, where we know that the speech therapist only has 2 open slots in her schedule each week for speech language therapy, then it's already predetermined that the student's IEP will require 2 sessions per week of speech language therapy. If the student requires 4 sessions per week of speech language therapy, then that's not the right placement. We should be deciding how many sessions in that example of speech language therapy the student requires before we start picking a placement for that program to be implemented so that we make sure that all of the students' needs are met.
So what are the placement options that the IEP team would be considering?
The law requires that there be a continuum of placement options available to all students with disabilities. What that means is that there be and this ties into the concept of least restrictive environment, that there be a continually, gradually increasing level of restrictiveness in terms of placement alternatives. So the least restrictive placement alternative would be placing a student into the regular school that he or she would attend in the regular education classes that he or she would attend if the student didn't have a disability, and providing supports in that setting. If that isn't sufficient, then we can move a degree of restrictiveness and provide services in that home school, but maybe add a period in the resource center or a couple periods in the resource center. If that's not sufficient, maybe we consider self-contained for part of the day or all of the day in that school. If that doesn't work, then we keep going through the continuum. We can consider placement in other schools within the school district. We can consider placement in neighboring school districts. We can consider placing the student into a private specialized school for students with disabilities, and so on. Residential placement is on the continuum, and some students require residential services in order to receive an appropriate education. In a very rare instance, it may be appropriate to educate a student in his or her home, if that's the only situation, the only place where the student can receive the services that he or she requires. But the point being that we're going to consider all of these different options through the IEP process and figure out where is the appropriate placement in which the student can receive the program that we've already designed for the student through the IEP process.
So once the team makes a decision about what placements they want to consider, can they ask the parent to pay for it if it's expensive?
Absolutely not, Brenda. And sometimes the placements can be expensive. Often there's a misunderstanding, I think, on the part of school districts that schools, particularly private schools for students with disabilities, are very expensive or more expensive than having a student in district. But often we find this the case, that if we are going to provide a truly appropriate program for a student in the school district, that it's more expensive to do it in the district than to consider placement into a private setting where the services and specialized supports are already there. But under no circumstances can the parents be asked to pay for any of it.
What can parents do if they want to go look at a program that they think might be appropriate for their child, but the district really doesn't want them to go look at it?
Well, Brenda, that's a very troubling issue that's come up frequently in our practice. What often happens is school districts will propose a number of alternative placements that the parents are able to visit, and these are placements that are handpicked by the district because the district believes that they're appropriate for the student. The parent may have different ideas about what's appropriate for the student, whether it's an in-district class or whether it's a private specialized school or something else. If the parent is able to access those placements on their own, then they can certainly just go visit and inform themselves about what the options are, and there's no problem. But more and more often, it's becoming the case that schools, in particular private specialized schools, require the visitation process to be initiated by the school district. And the school districts will often refuse to do that, and that leaves the parent in a position of a great disadvantage at the IEP table because the school district staff are able to discuss the programs that they're offering. The parents are not able to offer information based on firsthand knowledge, at least, about the programs or placements that they're interested in. So in order for the parents to be truly equal members of the IEP team, I think it's necessary, and I think the law requires that school districts assist parents in investigating placements, even if it's a placement that the district believes and knows that it would never agree to.
So if a private school, for example, has an open house program, parents can go and learn about the program in that way.
Certainly.
The other thing that we're hearing a lot of is that districts are telling families that the county office is refusing to approve a placement. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's going on?
Yes, Brenda, and it's a complicated and frustrating issue that's developed recently, mostly in New Jersey. A few years ago, there were regulations that were implemented by the New Jersey Department of Education, which on their face, when an average person reads them, seem to require that a school district that wishes to place a student into a private specialized school, and that's the only class of school that this applies to, private specialized schools, that school district needs to jump through additional hoops in order to place the student into that school. We believe that that's inappropriate and illegal because it interferes with the ability of the IEP team to make the final decision about a student's placement. But nonetheless, the regulations seem to require that before a student can be placed into a private specialized school, that the school district secure alternative suggestions from the county office, investigate those alternatives, which are in public programs throughout the county, and only after those options are ruled out can the student be placed into the private school. Some directors of special education and even some of the county executive superintendents have misinterpreted the regulations to mean that parents and school districts, for example, have to visit 3 public programs before they can place a student into a private school. That's certainly not written into the regulations. We had great concern about this, and working with ASSA, we were able to secure, with your help, also a letter from Lucille Davey, the Commissioner of Education in New Jersey, making it very clear that those interpretations of the regulations are not accurate, and that parents and school districts working together as the IEP team still have the sole and final authority to decide upon a placement, even if it's placement in a private specialized school. And parents need to arm themselves with that knowledge, because oftentimes that misinformation does slow down the placement process and sometimes results in a loss of placement opportunities because the classes become full while school districts are asking parents to look at schools that maybe neither party's interested in, but they're doing it because they believe the county requires it.